Hi, this is Mrs. Brown from Research Triangle High School. The purpose of this presentation is to give you a brief introduction to the epic poem of Beowulf. Now, Beowulf has a lot of the classic elements of an epic poem. You're going to be meeting heroes, you're going to be seeing monsters, you're going to be seeing fire-breathing dragons, all kinds of things that are happening. But first, I want to lay a little bit of a foundation for where this poem came from. Now, even though Beowulf is a story that comes from the Scandinavian tradition, it's considered the first great work of English national literature because it was actually one of the first works composed in what we consider to be the earliest form of English. Now, the epic story is about the hero, whose name is Beowulf, who's going to fight a demonic monster named Grendel, and then later on is also going to take on a dragon. Now, some of the people you're going to meet include Beowulf himself, the title character. He's the nephew of Hygelac and the king of the Geats. And then there's Hrothgar, who's the king of the Danes. Wiglaf, who's a Geat warrior who's one of Beowulf's select band, and kind of like his wingman, is the only one who stays with him right until this very final fight with the dragon. In addition to our cast of heroes, we also have some monsters. The first is Grendel, and this is a man-eating monster. He's this, and he comes up and he snatches people and eats them. And he lives at the bottom of this awful, disgusting, swampy mountain lake. And then there's his mother, who's even worse than he is, and she's a water witch, and she's going to come after Beowulf fights with Grendel, and she comes out and said, "You took my baby, and I don't like this." And then at the very last, at the end of his life, near the end of his career of being a wonderful king and this heroic warrior, he has one final fight with a dragon, and that's this giant fire-breathing serpent that he's going to fight at the end of the second part of the epic. And again, even though this is considered a work in English because of the way it was originally told, it actually takes place in Scandinavian. Remember, we've been looking at the Anglo-Saxons and how many of them actually came from this kind of Viking tradition, and they sailed over to Britain and settled in there, and they brought this story with them. And scholars think that the Heorot, the kingdom that they mention, or the mead hall that they mention, might have been built on the coast in Denmark. And you can sort of see how close England is here and how all of these Vikings would come over from Scandinavia to raid and then eventually to settle into this land. So we're going to talk about a couple of the places that are involved in the story. There's Heorot, and this is this big guest hall. Now, this would have been the largest building in the village, and the king would have these things built as a place for all the warriors to gather afterwards. They were known as mead halls because that's where everyone sat around after all the battles and told the stories and the tales and the songs and drank their mead in this giant hall. And this was supposed to be a golden one that was built by King Hrothgar. So when we talk about Beowulf, we're really talking about the concept of the epic hero. Now, an epic are these long story poems that are usually come to us from the oral tradition that have a couple of key characteristics, these narratives that reflect the values and heroic ideas of a particular society. We've looked at Gilgamesh, we've looked at the Odyssey, we've looked at these kinds of epics in the past in your English language arts classes. This epic basically is a quest story on a grand scale, and it's usually, again, told orally in poetry and passed on through generations to explain what that culture thought was important to remember and what would be heroic. Now, we're used to all different kinds of heroes today, everything from fictional to real people, historical people, a whole categories of folks that we consider heroic, like doctors and firefighters, and then things that come out of the cartoon and fictional epic. But when we talk about cartoon and fictional traditions, when we talk about the epic hero, though, we're really talking about some specific characteristics of heroic deeds. Now, if you want to learn something about a culture, learn something about its heroes. What does that particular group consider to be heroic? And other times in other cultures have had heroes. Sometimes the hero is someone who's physically strong. Sometimes the hero is someone who's inspirational. Sometimes the hero is someone who just does what no one else wants to do in some way. So you can tell a lot about a culture by looking at what kinds of things and people, what kinds of deeds and people they consider to be heroic. So if you remember from our presentation on the Anglo-Saxons, there's a couple of things that go into Anglo-Saxon culture that tell you a little bit about what they valued. The first idea was this idea of loyalty. That's that you would fight for your king because you had promised and made a bond with your king that you would do this, that you would avenge your kinsmen. If something happened to these people that you were loyal to, you would go after them, and that you would do what you said you would do. A king would keep his promise to his subjects, the subjects would keep their loyalty to the king, families would keep their promises to each other. There was also a great deal of generosity. Gift giving was a very important part of the culture. Guests would usually show up with a gift for the host. The host would give gifts for the people who were there, and it was a way to show bonds between families and between guests and hosts and people who were traveling. The idea in a lot of the Anglo-Saxon culture was that the highest idea of love was really the idea of brotherly love, not necessarily romantic love. Weddings and marriages were really for unifying the clans, although there certainly were love relationships. It wasn't considered to be like the key part of the culture to fall in love and live happily ever after. It was much more important that you had your clan and that you had your group and your family and that you had your king, because that's what was needed to protect the whole society. So most of the value that we see was about brotherly love, about loyalty of the warrior to his leader. There's a lot of emphasis on heroism too, and this could also be female in this case. And heroism almost always was about physical strength and courage in battle and your skill and resourcefulness in battle. There really wasn't a lot of ideals of heroism being certainly bravery in some sense, but not the way we think of today as somebody who was really smart and solved a problem, or somebody who just showed a lot of courage and did something that was really difficult, or someone who was really smart and was able to think through things. The heroism was pretty basic, full-on physical strength. And then the emphasis was really on your public reputation, not a lot about what do you think about on the inside, what are you worried about, are you really a good person? It was really about what have you shown to the rest of the world. And that's the end of the beginning. So over the next couple of days in class, we're going to be looking at studying the poem itself and looking at some of the poetic aspects of it as you put together your projects for this. And that's it.